it was Tate Davis Hartley. That was in 1885. And then it also happened Alicia Piper, which was Piper Big Pine, was a Native American. Native American, all of these cases, like the first three, happened in California. And then there's a Native American, and then Sylvia Mendes, which maybe, has anybody heard of Sylvia Mendes before? Sylvia Mendes.
So Sylvia Mendez, right, so all of these children before Linda Brown have all filed cases around segregation, right? So Sylvia Mendez was a half Mexican, half Puerto Rican girl. She lived in California, and she wasn't allowed to go to the white school that was in her neighborhood. And the white schools tend to have the better resources, better teachers, etc. She wasn't allowed to go, so they sued the state of California, and she was, how old, 7, 9? Yeah. About 7 to 9 years old, but like, she's that age and her case got cleared, right? So, and then Linda Brown happened after her on the other coast. Yes.
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 All of them won.
All of them won the cases.
And it was Brown versus Board of Education, which went all the way to the Supreme Court, that made it across the country, right? Before the cases were just in California, the Supreme Court said that it's inherently unequal to have separate schools. And I feel like this goes back to what you all were saying, which is so deep, is that when we separate people, we're inherently saying who is worthy and who is not worthy, right? And so when we do that separation, what we see is that people of color continue to get less resources, less access, less support, and just like less respect for their dignity, right? And so the idea is that if we keep separating people, that's gonna keep happening. And what we actually need to do is see each other and believe in the dignity and value of every person in every school. But like he said, like these injustices are complicated, right? Like the segregation and what that looks like throughout history has been complicated. So for example, in the 1960s, many mayors were investing in white middle-class neighborhoods. They were pouring in resources, they were helping developers, they were basically making it as easy as possible for those neighborhoods to get resources, get support. While schools and communities in the inner city, in the ghettos, the barrios, right, they were being disinvested from. Resources were being taken out, support was being taken out. And this was happening at the same time, right, in parallel.
So young African Americans and Puerto Ricans organized the Black Panthers and the Young Lords to demand access to housing, health care, and other basic services. They started free breakfast programs to make sure that students were not hungry before starting school. Has anybody heard of the Black Panthers and the Young Lords? Young Lords too, right? Cool, yeah. The Young Lords were here. They're in East Harlem, South Bronx. So, a lot of history here. Yeah, and some of the Young Lords as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't talk about though is the good work that the women did. Speak about the fact that the women were the ones that were behind those breakfast programs.
So one of the other injustices that we see from the very beginning of this country was that Native American children were actually taken from their homes and forced to go to boarding schools. And the idea of these boarding schools was not to support these young Native people, it was to turn them more white. They literally said that, right? That literally was the reason. And you can see these are the same kids 3 years after being in a boarding school, where their culture, their history was stripped, right? And it's still the residue, the impacts of that are still with us, right? How could they not be when you said when we don't acknowledge the darkness of what that was and really restore it, like it's still there. But some beautiful things happen even in the midst of all that injustice.
So even in these oppressive conditions, Native American students from various tribes came together to share and celebrate their cultures. So a student at the Santa Fe Indian School in 1927 said, "I don't think I appreciated my Indianness until I became a senior in high school when we had our Indian club here."
And those continue today, right? Like BSUs in schools, or whatever kind of group you have that can uplift and honor your identity can be really important. So in 1971, San Francisco schools desegregated, right? So we're after Brown versus Board, they're like, okay, we're gonna desegregate, which means we're gonna move people into schools together. But what happened was over 1,800 Chinese students who were not yet fluent in English were placed in special education classes or forced to be in the same grade for years. For years, right? Can I talk about this one because it really inspires me? Okay, because the thing is like they were like being told that because they didn't yet speak English, they needed special education support, or they couldn't move on from their grades, right? And it was like, that's just, they're not being seen for who they really are, right? So, Kinney Kinman Lau and other Chinese students filed Lau versus Nicholas to challenge on behalf of all 1,800 of those students. They said, special education's not bad, being held back a grade isn't necessarily bad. What's bad is that all of us are being treated like we don't have what it takes when really you're not supporting us with what we need. And it's because of them that we have ESL classes across America. The fact that ESL exists is because of the bravery of these students to say, no, you cannot treat us this way, right? And like, remember, we're talking about integration, which matters to us, but this was in desegregation. Like, this was desegregated, but they weren't yet integrated, right? They weren't yet told, like, you are valuable parts of our community, and so we're gonna speak to you in a way that you can understand, that makes sense to you, and support you in learning what you need to learn to be able to thrive and succeed. Very passionate. Oh, sorry, injustice. So, okay, the injustice, it just makes me really mad. So in the 1960s, this doesn't sound like, actually, it says the 1960s, but if you listen, it's kind of like maybe tomorrow. New York City, Black and Puerto Rican children were often labeled as disruptive and sent to separate schools for problem children. And they often ended up pushed out of those schools into prison. Like that was, in the 1960s, these schools were basically like, we're pushing the kids out who are being disruptive, and then from that school, we're just gonna concentrate those kids and then not support them anymore, but actually just keep pushing them into the system. Then,
so for 6 weeks in 1965, hundreds of students from these problem schools boycotted school to bring attention to the discriminatory policies that placed them in these inferior schools.
And this is really all about those people who are most impacted always being at the center of the fight for justice, right? So after Brown versus Board of Ed, all right, we're gonna desegregate our schools, but the issue was that almost all Black teachers were fired in the South. Because where were those Black kids going to school? They were going to school at schools led by Black educators, right? Who were invested in those kids, who cared about those kids, who had built all kinds of expertise as teachers. But when the schools were integrated, really, it was like the Black kids had to go to the white spaces, right? No white kids were going to those Black schools. And those Black teachers were fired en masse. And by 1967, over 90% of teachers and administrators in New York City were white, even though only 45% of students were white. And many Black and Puerto Rican students felt that their white teachers did not understand that, or believe, importantly, in their potential. Right? And they were already treating them like they didn't have what it took, right?
No, it was me too. I feel it, I go through this every time I leave this workshop. I'm like, but parents, educators, and students in Harlem, Ocean Hill, Brownsville fought to hire more teachers and principals of color to have at these schools in order to support the students that actually look like them. Yes. But we're not fully there yet.
More to go.
Yes, so 10 years after Brown versus Board of Ed, New York City schools were not integrating. 460,000 New York City youth held a one-day school boycott. This was the largest civil rights protest in U.S. history. Keep in mind, you never learned this in class. So yeah, kind of like what I said before about the point platform. So that's the 10-point platform of the Black Panther Party, and this is the 13-point program and platform of the Young Lords. So we looked at that. We looked at young groups in history that have also been leading movements, leading for change, and we created our own point platform.
This is us. This is our 5-point platform. So we're going to talk a little bit about what each of these points are. So the first one is race and enrollment, right? So in the past, what we saw was there were literal laws on the books that said white kids go here, students of color go here, right? But things have changed since then. But the question is how much, right? So here, we're going to skip this question. So in New York City, 20% of high schools are screened schools. That means that you can only get into that high school if you meet certain criteria. So quick question, who can define what an algorithm is? An algorithm. It's a great question. What is an algorithm? Say again. A figure? Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Takes place of like human labor.
It takes place of human labor. So it replaces human decision making with computer decision making. Yeah? Yeah.
Like it's something that is not fixed, so any person can have different questions. If it's about a homework, because that is used in our homeworks.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have a test and we have homework chapter 11, not everyone has the same question because it's an algorithm.
And the algorithm mixes up which questions people get. So this is perfect. It's a decision-making system created by humans but run by computers. Okay? So some examples, a process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations. So like a recipe, like a cookie recipe, is an algorithm. Do this, then that, then that, then that. It's just executed by a person, right? Your Facebook timeline and your Instagram timeline are also run by algorithms. So have you ever noticed when you like click on someone's profile and then all of a sudden you see their stuff that much more? That's because the algorithm is like, oh, they probably care about this person, I'm gonna show them more things, right? So the thing is that there is an algorithm in New York that decides who goes to what school. And this algorithm basically discriminates against groups who are already marginalized, based on race, based on class, based on language, based on immigration status. So the question is, this algorithm is doing this, what are we gonna do? So let's just look at how this works. So here are 3 examples of schools, okay?
Yeah, these are all real schools. We just changed their names so that we won't expose them like that.
It's like when you change the voice of like a person on TV. Yeah.
Well, so if you put white as one of the choices that is
Well, so here's what's interesting.
black.
Okay, so here's what's interesting. Yeah.
White.
But the thing is, they don't ask your race. They don't ask your race. We're gonna show you what they look at. Okay, but then we're gonna talk about why that's not fair. So these 3 schools, Gold, Prep, and Light. So each of them requires that you have a certain grade level. So Gold, you have to have on your English and Math state test a certain level. If you don't have that grade, you can't even be considered for that school. For Prep, it's that plus your GPA has to be a certain level, and you have to do a writing assessment. And an interview, so you have to go in, be like, hi, I'm a good person for this school. You have to do all of that to get into this school. It's a public school. Then Light, you have to do all that plus have a portfolio of work, okay? So when we look at the real data about who applies to this school, this is what it looks like. So this is for gold. Yeah, this is for, thank you, Iman. So black applicants make up 20%. Then we've got white applicants in red, Asian applicants in yellow, Latinx applicants in green, and other in purple. Okay, this is who applies to the school. This is who gets in. Can you show that again? Go back and forth. Who applies? Who gets in? Who applies? Who gets in? The white people are getting in at much higher rates. Okay? So what does that mean? That means that this process where it says, oh, we just care about your grades, like that's all that matters. But that's not what's actually happening in the school, right? So let's just look at this another one. This is the prep. This is like the real school, right? Black, white, Asian, Latinx, other, and it requires an interview. This is what it looks like, who got in. Right? Again and again, we see the same pattern. And why is that so? Why is that so? It's like because we know that racism is prevalent. So if you went to a middle school that didn't have the resources to support you in preparing for an interview, how's that fair? To go against a middle-class white kid who probably had plenty of support in their middle school, right? Because the thing is, if we have these segregated, unequal middle schools and segregated, unequal elementary schools, then when we come to high school and we say, oh, we're just gonna see who got high enough grades. We're not really even looking at the grades anymore. Now we're just looking at, did you have enough privilege for the past, 8 years of school to pass this test? So, okay, great, so this, yeah. We're working on it. Yeah. Okay, great, so this is what we're doing. Yeah, I saw behind you really quick.
Yeah, because if the algorithm doesn't ask for your grades,
Yeah.
so how we get to this number?
Exactly. So how, because, right, instead of using race, we've started using other things to create the same reality. Like these ideas of an interview. So if you go in for an interview, right, there's so many studies about this, it's disgusting. There's so many studies that if I go into an interview as a white lady, I am just more likely to be liked by that person. It's fucked up. Sorry, excuse me, we're recording this. It is, but I'm gonna be liked, I'm gonna be trusted, I'm gonna be assumed to be intelligent, right? And I'd like to think that I am intelligent and trustworthy, but that's not the point. The point is that if someone who is a person of color goes in, they're not likely to get that same benefit of those eyes that see that way, right? And so what that means is when kids go into these interviews for their school, are they being seen the same way by the people who are interviewing them? No way. No way. And so how is that fair to base who gets in on the school, especially when we know that the result is unfair, right? It's not like we can see that who applies and who gets in, it's unfair, right? So we're working on it. You said who's working on it? We're working on it. So our students rewrote the algorithm. So they're literally working on rewriting the algorithm to make it more fair. And what they want to do is they want to say, we value integrated schools. As a country, we should believe that integrated schools are important. And so what we need to do is we need to make an algorithm that invests in diversity of race, of class, of education, of religion. It needs to invest in that, right? And so how are we going to do that? Is we're going to put value onto things that are not being considered. Put value onto things like if you are learning English. To put value on things like if you have an incarcerated family member, right? And to say, that's actually good. Good, come to our school, we want that, right? To totally flip the way that society values. So we're working on this right now. And, can we skip that? So some of the things that we've actually been able to win is that in District 15 in Brooklyn, so District 15 in Brooklyn has Sunset Park, Ditmas, Red Hook, Park Slope, Cobble Hill. It's a very diverse district, but the middle schools are very segregated. So we worked with some of our students Here's one of our middle school students right there. And they actually decided as a community to recommend to the mayor that these screens, these limits for who gets into what school, which exist in middle school, should be eliminated. And the mayor approved it. So this next year, there will be no screens in that district. We're on a group to talk about actually the whole city and the whole city's plan, right? Because District 15 is only one district. The middle schools are only the middle schools, right? We're talking about the whole city. And that group is going to be coming out with a report very soon about what we think the mayor and the chancellor need to do. So we're very hopeful, based on what happened in District 15, that we're going to see some action and some movement to make the schools more integrated and to repair what has been wrong with this process.
So we're going to talk about resources. What are examples of resources in your school? Like, anybody tell me?
Shout it out. We're raising all books.
Like music programs, right? Sport team.
Oh, more clothes.
Yeah, very important. Anybody else? Art. Yeah.
When the teachers are only taking care of you.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know some of the schools have 40 plus teams in New York City? Do you know that? And then other schools have none? Or one or two? In Brownsville, let's say, the schools, the only sports that they have is basketball and volleyball. Like, why? Why in any white school there are more sports than others? Now, one of our executive director, Mark Diaz, and he's suing the DOE. And it's called Fair Play Coalition, and that's what's going on right now. We were in the New York Times.
Just to kind of conclude resources. So resources includes your textbooks, it includes technology in the room, it includes whether you have this or if you have a smart board or a Promethean board, right? Or the type of quality of lunch that's being served in the schools. So schools that have students that are how is it? No, not vegan. No, I meant to say free reduced lunch. Students that rely on the lunch that in their school, right? They're given the same, excuse my language, they're given the same shitty chicken nuggets and pizza every single day, right? And if those students are relying on that type of food, how do you expect them to go back to class and actually have the brain to function throughout the rest of the day? And so it's lunch quality, and it's sports teams, right? Sports teams come with what the students rely for sports. Swimming? Scholarships, right? There are students in high schools that really rely on their sports teams so that they can get scholarships to apply to college. Or even if they're not an A student, those are sports and different programs that they can rely to keep them busy in school and to keep them interactive and to keep them doing good things. But there are schools that have, like we said, have no sports teams. There are schools that have no gym. There are schools that have a gymatorium, which is literally the auditorium and the gym in one. But then there are also other schools that have an entire Olympic-sized swimming pool. Right? And these are all public schools, keep in mind. These are all public high schools. So a lot of times people forget, because it's not private versus public, this is public versus public. So really keep in mind about all of the resources in your schools, because that's kind of what gets you going in general. So that's just kind of on resources. So our student, Matt Diaz, he's a senior in high school. He actually is from the South Bronx. He lives in the South Bronx, attends high school in the South Bronx, not too far from here.
He literally lives like a block away.
Yeah, like probably 3 minutes away. But that's him, right? And he's 17, 18 years old. And he's suing the Department of Education due to unequal access of sports teams. Because it's not fair that some schools have over 40 sports teams, and Stuyvesant High School has a freaking gymnastics team. Like, but there are schools that have no sports teams. And it's like, oh, you're gonna give like underserved schools like basketball and soccer because those are the cheapest sports to fund. Right, so it's really like, if you go more in depth into the resources of the school, this all matters and this all plays into the role of segregation. It's still going on. It just happened, yeah. So relationships, which is our third R. So what are types of relationships in your school, or an experience that you've had, or have seen, or have heard about relationships? Yeah. Too much drama? Yeah, that happens.
Someone is only waiting
Social media problems, yeah, that plays a role, definitely. I guess like I'll like say one. So like a relationship problem in my school, in high school. Wow, there were several. So I attended a predominantly white high school in Brooklyn. It was a screen school. I identify as bicultural. I'm half Puerto Rican and half Arab. So when I was at school and I was representing Puerto Rico for the multicultural fair, I made piña coladas, right? And then some white kid came up to me and was like, "Oh, are these Mexican?" And I was like, "You don't see the huge like Puerto Rican flag like behind me, but like also why would you ask if they're Mexican as if being Mexican is an insult?" Right? And this is the relationship that I have with a student, not a healthy one, right? And even in the lunchroom, right? Students will segregate themselves amongst each other. So you would have like the white kids segregated themselves amongst each other. So you would have the Russian Jews here, you'll have the Italians here, you have even like everybody segregates themselves. So the Caribbean blacks here, the African blacks here, the Latinos were a really small group, so they just joined together. But you see how like everybody kind of like goes off into their own groups and segregates themselves, and they're not even making healthy relationships and actually like valuing each other's background and culture and really learning about that. And if you go to a school that only has predominantly one race or one culture, how are you going to really learn about all of the beautiful diversity and food and history and just culture, language that the rest of New York City students have to offer, right? He didn't, because I didn't snitch on him. I kind of told him off myself. Yeah. But like things happen like that, right? So like even in my high school that was predominantly white, my grade only had 20 black students. And we were about 300 students. Only 20 of them were black, and maybe about 17 of them were Latino. And we would have like white students go up to black students using the N-word like on a regular because they feel like, oh, I have a black friend, I could talk to him in that way. Or I listen to rap music, I could throw the N-word around. And it's like, no, like you really can't. But they don't know that because the majority of the students in the school don't look like them. But they don't have teachers in the building that are teachers of color, right? Like they don't have like people like to actually say like, no, that's wrong. And like if you don't have individuals like that in the school, racism is gonna continue to increase. And we're just gonna sit here and complain about it, but it's really like, we shouldn't be going through this to begin with.
Yeah, because I notice a lot in schools that they hire people that don't really qualify the job, and the people who are qualified the job, but it's just that they're different or they don't have the higher requirements for the job.
It happens, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that it's kind of hard for the students to act differently if the city is set up the way. You've got Puerto Ricans in a certain neighborhood, you've got blacks, both different kind of blacks in different neighborhoods. You've got Jamaicans in a certain neighborhood, Haitians in a certain neighborhood, and it's split up like that. So it's like from the top it goes down, and it's very hard to try to change that in a school, unless you're in a school like Hostos or the community schools, colleges, and it's it's like it starts from home or the city from the top.
Yeah. So housing segregation definitely correlates to school segregation. Yeah.
That I was like,
Yeah.
I didn't see I saw one white person, I was like, one. And then I was like, when I went to Chinatown, I said, wow, I'm in a different country.
Yeah.
I mean, it can really be seen and felt.
Yes.
So the brown versus brown is one thing, but it hasn't really changed.
Exactly. Exactly what you're saying. There's a student that lives in the South Bronx that I met, and she told me, like, Iman, I've never met a white girl in my life. And, like, she's Latina. She's born and raised in the South Bronx. And, like, it's like, that's crazy. You live in the most diverse city in the world, and you've never met, like, somebody that doesn't look like you. And, like, that's kind of, like, why we want to change it. Because New York City high schools, now we know that, like, elementary and middle schools, like, it's more, like, zoned. But for high schools, you don't have to go to a zoned school. For high school, you get this big book in the 8th grade that you can apply to any single high school in New York City. That means you're allowed to go to Staten Island if you wanted to, right? But then it comes with all the admissions and how we said, the race and enrollment process. That's a huge thing as to why our schools are so separated. Also, do you feel your identity is respected in your school community? We say yes, yes. My identity in middle school was not respected, where I was bullied based on disabilities. I'm so sorry to whoever wrote that. You shouldn't have. But that's what made you stronger. That's what got you here. So snaps to you, snaps to all of you for being here and staying with us as well. I think that's it. These were just people that we were gonna kind of like explain to you. People throughout history, but we don't really have that much time left. So yeah, Sylvia Mendez. Yes, that was her. Yeah.
Yeah, so the real part of this is, right, it's like, how do you build the relationships? But also, like, how is what you're learning in school connected to valuing people from different backgrounds, right? And like, we talked about Sylvia Mendez, and there were a few people who had maybe heard of her, but like, this is an important person. Right? An important person, a Puerto Rican and Mexican advocate, young person who made change, right? And then for that case actually led to Brown versus Board of Education. Then you have someone like Elizabeth Eckford. Have you all seen this photo?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she's amazing. She's still alive. And she was one of the Little Rock Nine. Right? And she walked alone and was yelled at and threatened by protesters. And here's the thing that's important about her, is it wasn't just those white people in the back. It was actually the governor of Arkansas who called in police to stop her from going to the school. The governor of Arkansas said, no, I'm going to call the police to stop you, which is why the National Guard had to be called in by the president. Like, that's how serious this was, right? Like, people were, the governor was trying to stop it from happening, right? And we don't see that as explicitly anymore, but we are still facing some of the same challenges with the power structures as they are, right? Not wanting things to change, not wanting justice, not rushing to make the change that is necessary. So Frank Korematsu has it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
That picture, the other picture that
Yeah.
you showed, the white girl that was yelling at her behind him, they actually met years later. They met her, and she told Elizabeth that she was sorry about what she said.
The whole
was done.
situation.
Yeah.
Which I think is just such an important thing to say, that healing is possible, right? That we really can make change. The thing is, we just don't want to wait another 65 years. for that change to happen, right? And so it's like, how do we speed up that process? Does anybody know Fred Korematsu? Okay, see, this is the thing. Y'all went to school. These were important people, right? And not to say that, those dead white people that you learned about were important, but like, maybe they weren't important, And maybe the question is really like, who was showing up in your classrooms as like the people we should respect and admire? So Fred Korematsu was an American civil rights activist who objected to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. So in World War II, there was an attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese Navy, right? It was a war, they attacked. It's usually how that goes. Can you go back? FDR actually the president authorized the removal of all Japanese people and forced them to go into concentration camps in California. So our president, the president of this country, said Japanese people are going to be forced out of their homes and put into these camps. So my husband's grandfather was actually in one of these camps. And so they were segregated into these camps and had to live there for years while the war continued and even after it. And 1/3 of those people were students who went to schools in those camps. So Japanese young people were learning and in Japanese-only environments where they were being forced to live there. Fred Korematsu actually challenged the orders and he became a fugitive because he wouldn't follow the law. The law was totally unjust and he wouldn't follow it, and he challenged it in court. So in 1944, the Supreme Court actually ruled that it was okay. They said, check, go ahead, this is no problem, interning a whole group of Japanese people in this country. And get this, it wasn't actually until 2018, that's right, the year that just happened, that the Supreme Court said they made a mistake. It wasn't until 2018 when there was the case against Trump